There's really two themes from Scripture that capture for me Bishop Curlin's life. The first is the self-giving love of Jesus, who expended himself endlessly in preaching and administering to the poor and sick, and finally laying down his life out of love for all of us. The second is love to the very end. As St. John says of Jesus, he loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. Father Curlin, Monsignor Curlin, Bishop Curlin, or Father Bill or Bishop Bill gave of himself always, from his first days as the third assistant at St. Gabriel Parish in Washington, right down to the very last weeks and days of his life. Mention has been made many times of his love for the sick, but I can share an experience of my own. Many years ago, as a recently ordained priest, I was in the car heading back to the parish when I began to feel chest pains, and I landed in the hospital. I think I was still in the emergency room when none other than Monsignor Curlin appeared with the holy oils and the ritual and the best ever bedside manner. Next day, he walked into my hospital room with my mother, whom he had flown from Louisville, Kentucky, so that she could look after her son. Thankfully, I recovered. I did not die in his arms. And I did not become a retreat story. Bishop Curlin was also the go-to person when things went wrong. My first pastor was one of Bill Curlin's very dearest friends, but they could not have been more different. My pastor would occasionally go into orbit, and when that happened, anything could and would happen, as on the day when he fired the housekeeper. I was awestruck. It was like witnessing a typhoon or an earthquake. And if this firing had been written up in an HR manual, it would be in the chapter entitled Mistakes to Avoid. Well, no sooner than this all happened than my pastor realized, to his credit, how wrong it all was. And of course, the person he would call was his dear friend, Bill Curlin. Monsignor Curlin dropped absolutely everything, rushed over to visit his friend and me, the bewildered assistant, but he never came empty-handed. He brought a large bag of Roy Rogers hamburgers and fries. And before the end of the evening, he had us laughing at ourselves. He gave his good friend, my pastor, the right advice on how to resolve the situation justly and charitably, and gave me an invaluable lesson about priestly friendship and fraternity. No matter what he was doing, Bishop Bill would drop everything, especially when someone was in trouble or distress. How many of us in this church have been consoled and counseled and encouraged by this wonderful priest and bishop with an enormous capacity for friendship, but not just any friendship, but a friendship rooted in the Lord's love. How many priestly and religious vocations he fostered and saved, how many married couples he kept together, and I can tell you that he not only helped me to answer my call to the priesthood, but so many times when the going would get rough, in times of discouragement, Bishop Bill was the one who bucked me up. Long before Pope Francis spoke about encountering the Lord in one another, about accompanying one another, about priests being close to their people, Bishop Curlin lived that reality, no matter what assignment he happened to be in. A few days after his death, one of the bishop's ecumenical colleagues said that Bishop Curlin exuded Christ, radiated Christ, radiated the joy of the gospel. This is why his ministry, I think, seemed to be so spontaneous, even effortless, preaching 5 7-day retreats, 3 talks a day and a homily, without a note, being free to go wherever he was most needed, an uncanny sense of what the real gospel priority might be in any given situation. This is not to say that he didn't experience deep suffering in his life, including deep spiritual suffering, and that suffering that comes when one takes the risk of loving other people selflessly. Yet when Bishop Curlin smiled at you, it was Jesus smiling. And when he embraced you, it was the embrace of Jesus. These last years, when we talk on the phone, the bishop would tell me that his days were quiet and not too many people came to visit. But of course, that wasn't true. As I would see when I visited him in person, he did a land office business on the phone as people called him for advice or just to say hello. He was always out doing something, including saying Mass for his beloved missionaries of charity or taking an out-of-town visitor to Maggiano's. They lost their best customer. And people dropped in constantly. I'm told that just a few weeks ago, a group of grade school students stopped in to see him. Bishop Curlin would have it no other way. He was born to be a priest. He was born to love. And he loved us to the very end, like Jesus. Bill, may your great priestly soul rest in the peace of Christ.